I found it interesting during the blessing of little children this morning. I don't know, probably you all had your heads bowed during the individual prayer, but little Hannah, I had put one hand on her, and with the one hand that was on her, she was pulling the hair on my hand. So I thought, well, she's good with that. I'll put the other one. And I touched her, and she kept pushing it away. And I tried one finger, and she went. So I don't know where she got that from. But so one was okay, but two was not. So anyway, I kind of got a kick out of that. And you never know what they're going to do. Could give you plenty of stories, but it's also kind of adds a little bit of enjoyment to it. Well, here we are, the Sabbath after the feast in Defuniak Springs, and it is just a delightful Sabbath to be back with all of you. It is interesting to note in the study of human cultures that every culture of every tribe or nation or state or religion in human history has developed and established various days for worship and celebration. This would seem to be a manifestation of an innate urge to religion that God has put within us. Now, you and I know and understand the commands given to us by the Creator God on when and how we are to worship Him. Yet men continue to stubbornly refuse to do that. Let's go over to the book of Isaiah as we begin this morning. Isaiah chapter 29. Isaiah chapter 29 and verse 13. Wherefore the Lord said, forasmuch as this people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do they honor me, but they have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precepts of men. Here we see God has created within us or a desire to have a connection with something greater and bigger than we are. Yet, in, frankly, rebellion, we all tend to want to fulfill that desire in our own way. Human nature, as you know, is pretty stubborn, isn't it? Indeed, we are. If you don't think so, ask yourselves, how old was your child when the first word they learned was not mama, papa, or other ones, but it was what? No! And usually the lip goes out. You know, and we used to say to our kids, when the lip goes out, the bird comes and stands on it. I don't want a bird on my lip, right? But they say no. Right? No. In Matthew chapter 15, verse 9, here it says, in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. And it is in vain, because God does not simply accept pagan worship practices. Pagan meaning against what God desires, alternate. Those are not to be used in worshiping Him. Yet that is exactly what our culture and society is doing. Yes, we mask it as cute, fun, in a party-type atmosphere. But we must look behind the smoke and the mirrors. And if we're not careful, our thinking will become muddled to where, it's just fun. It's okay. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, go back with me, if you would, to Deuteronomy chapter 12 and verse 29. Very familiar passage of Scripture here. Well, the Lord your God shall cut off the nations before you, whether you go to possess them and you succeed them and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you not be snared by following them. I've mentioned this before, but as a child I used to make snares to catch things. I used to like to catch sparrows. And I made little traps and snares that I learned from others. And there was nothing more exciting than watching the little animal go in and get instantly surprised and caught. Then I, for whatever reason, didn't hurt them. I just let them go. And I used to catch mice and bugs and flies, bees, all kinds of things. But the snare, the surprise, very seldom did they expect it. You know, I don't know of too many mice that says, before I go for the cheese or the peanut butter or whatever's on there, I'm going to take a piece of grass and see if I can trip it. You know, usually they get caught because it's a snare. They're not ready. He said, take heed that you do not be snared after they be destroyed before you, and that you acquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so I'm going to do the same thing. You shall not do so unto the Lord your God, for every abomination. And when I growing up, I wasn't sure what abomination meant, but it was not a good word. Because whenever the minister used it, he said, abomination! I just, that's got to be bad. One child said, well, it's because he's going to bomb a nation. Well, that's bad too. So, is abomination to God, which he hates, have they done to their gods, for even their sons and daughters have been burnt in the fire. How awful to sacrifice. Do we do that today? It's called abortion. We do that today. Matter of fact, there's some big rally going on. Thousands and thousands of, that's okay. We need the freedom of choice, right? What things soever I command you, observe to do it. Don't add to it, or don't diminish from it. Let me translate that. Don't make a custom that says it's okay when God says it isn't. But what do we do in society, in the culture, in the religious culture? What do we do? If you think about it for a moment, about the culture we live in, Don Ward talked about this during the sermon, during the feast, I believe. A good portion of our society would claim still to be Christian, and sincerely so. Yet virtually every religious observance of every Protestant or Christian faith is based upon customs and heathen practices that were either adopted or adapted in attempt to worship God. And yet it's so simple. He said, this is how you are to worship me. What part of how is unclear? I want to take a look at a custom, and I'll be giving this sermon next Sabbath in New Orleans and Laurel, and I wanted to be able to cover this before I leave for a few weeks again. I want to talk about a custom and a practice that is very timely, coming up soon. Coming down here today, I saw several different things related to this, and yesterday when I was walking. That of Halloween. It will be observed in the U.S. in just a few short days here. It is perhaps the strangest, weirdest, evilest, if that's a word, custom. And many today don't even understand this holiday or have it has no religious significance at all. And yet I saw last year a sign on a church. I won't say what denomination. It said, come in for our Halloween service and our Halloween sermon. I don't think it was, we're going to tell you all that's wrong with it. Maybe I'm wrong. I didn't go. I was going to send Mr. Taylor, but I didn't go. But I've heard of some of what is covered. For them, it is just something fun for the kiddies. And it becomes into an adult fun. Is this fun holiday actually what? It is very much veiled in ancient practice with much darker roots or roots. I want to analyze this holiday a little bit from a perspective that we may not have given much thought about. First, let's go back in time, hence the title of the sermon. Let's go back in time in history familiar to us all. Now, I know I've talked a lot about this over the years, but it does tie in with several important aspects of our Christian walk in our life with God. Let's go to Genesis chapter 2. You all know this. All of you could explain this in your sleep with one eye shut. No problem. Or close to being asleep. Unless you talk in your sleep. Genesis chapter 2. Let's go back to the Garden of Eden. Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. And the Lord God took the man to work with him. He put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it. I always like to say, Mr. Mez isn't here, but maybe it was just to cut the grass and trim the bushes. But he put him in there to dress it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree, this included the tree of life, you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat of it, for in the day, interestingly enough, a day is 1,000 years to God. Remember how long Methuselah lived? Almost a day. 969 years, I believe that's what it was. But he said, in the day that you eat thereof, you shall surely die. Or another translation says, you are as good as dead. This was the first prophecy. This is the first prophecy for those of you that like prophecy. How well we remember the story. How many choices were there? You thought about this? 2, right? Actually, there's 3. Because you have the tree of life, and then the tree of life, the tree of life, and then of the knowledge of good and evil, and there's the rub. See, every day we get to make choices. And if you're not connected to God, that tree of life, what happens? You have to decide, is it good or is it not good? Is it evil? Simple, right? What's the hardest thing we face every day of our lives? Is it good or is it evil? And where do we find out if it is? We go to God's Word. And the implication, the principle, if not directly, just brought out. So, that was the 2 trees. Now, we're going to have a little bit of a twist with the Halloween, if you will, because now we're going to go to what? The treat first, before the trick and the lie. We're going to go to the treat. Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 3. Because here's a harmless question, some have said. I heard a minister one time from another group stand up and say, oh, it was a harmless question. Really? The serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, here Satan is accusing her. Anytime somebody starts to accuse me, I say, oh boy, what kind of approach do we have here? And so, he said, now let me get this straight. Has God said you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? He doubted God. He tries to put doubt in the mind. Did God say this? Are you sure? And the woman's mistake here was she should have did the old run, Forrest, run, just out of there. Or Snagglepuss, exit stage, get out of there. Exit stage right and go left. Or gotten the hoe out, one or the other, right? By the way, if a snake ever or a serpent ever talks to you, don't talk to it. Okay, don't do that. Ever. Matter of fact, if animals talk to you, let me know, will you? Don't talk to them either. I mean, some of you talk to your pets, but you know what I'm saying. If your pet says, so how's it going? We got a problem. All right, so. The serpent there said, as God said, you should not eat of it. And the woman said to the serpent, oh, we can eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But of the fruit of the tree of which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, don't eat of it. And she adds here, Eve adds this, and neither shall you touch it. We say in Spanish, no toca, right? No toca, don't touch. No touch, don't touch that. He said, don't even touch it, much less eat of it. You're going to die. You will surely die. So here's the temptation. Human gullibility is shown again. One of our major weaknesses, especially apart from God, is we are honestly very gullible. And don't say, no, I'm not gullible. We all are. My experience has been, as church members, sometimes we're a bit naive. We assume the best because we don't want to be negative. And when he tells someone, Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is deceitfully wicked. Above all things, who can know it? Oh, it's not that bad. I remember in classes I took for years in psychology, the human heart is inherently good. We're good people. No, we're not. Someday I'll give a sermon on the psychology of evil, but I'm waiting. So the treat, right? There's the treat, but you can't quite have it. Right? And then the lie. And the serpent said unto the woman, verse 4, you shall not surely die. And he was right. Do you know that? That was the truth. In part. He said, you're not going to... I have this app on my phone. It's got a chicken that standing up and just... and then the leg goes... Right? So he was right. He told the truth. In part. You're not going to die immediately. Right? But it wasn't the truth because it was a mixture purposely concocted to make it sound true. And so, you will not die. And then he adds, and you'll know good and evil. You'll be like God. You'll be a God. He didn't say God with a capital G. He was smart enough to not do that. But he said, you'll be a God. That's why we have so many films about all these Marvel superheroes and gods and Loki and all these things, because it's something that makes you feel powerful, smart, wise, not human. Right? Interestingly enough, our adversary always desired to have the wisdom of God, but he didn't. Because his character was corrupted. Now we come to the trick. The trick of Halloween. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. And when the woman saw the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit, ate, and then gave to her husband with her, and he said, no toka. No, he said, yes, dear. Let's both have a nice big bite of this fruit. Doesn't say it was an apple, it just says fruit. And verse 7, the trick, the eyes of both of them were opened, and then they knew that they were naked. Did they ask God for forgiveness? No. Right? They knew they were both naked. Right? Why would they feel ashamed when it was just the two of them? There was no need for that. I'm sorry, I don't want to get too personal, but when I'm without clothing with my wife, that I have a legal document before God and man, I'm not ashamed. Well, things are getting saggy, I'm ashamed, But I'm not ashamed that because God said it is good. Right? And so they knew it, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Now, eventually they probably would have done something similar when more people were around. I'm not saying that this somehow says that the whole world could be a nudist colony. But the point was, this is what happened. They ate the treat. They suffered the trick, a trick of shame, blame, sin, and sadness. Halloween, the name, comes from the Old English meaning hallowed eve. It was also known as All Souls Eve or All Saints Day, and it wasn't the New Orleans Saints. The earliest Halloween, or Hallowa, comma, or apostrophe in, Hallowa in celebration in Britain were held by the Druids in honor of what? Samhain. A lot of people, it's spelled Samhain. It's Israel Gaelic for the end of the summer. The standard Irish pronunciation is Samhain with the O like in cow or Samhain. That almost sounds like a southern people say, I've been sowing. fixing something with thread and needle, but now I'm in trouble. All right. They don't say that in Mississippi, do they? Sowing? Sowing. Okay. Other pronunciations that follow with many Gaelic dialects include Soween, Saveen, Sowen, like in glow. The Scots Gaelic spelling is S-A-M-H-U-I-N or U-I-N-N. The Lord of the Dead, whose festival fell on the 1st of November. It was a Druidical belief that on the eve of the festival of Samhain, Lord of the Death, called together all the wicked spirits that within the past 12 months had been condemned to inhabit the bodies of animals. It was night for the universal walking about of all sorts of spirits, fairies, ghosts, all of whom had liberty on that night. Do you wonder why there's such a proclivity for zombie movies now? The Walking Dead? It's not just a coincidence, right? It's not just a coincidence. For the Celts and the Druids and other tribes of Northern Europe, November 1st was the beginning of their new year. It was the time when the leaves and the crops were dying. It seemed the logical time for them to what? Commemorate the dead. So they created a celebration to fulfill their desire. But the origins are far more widespread than the Druids and Celts of Britain and Europe. This is from a book entitled Folklore, page 11. There was a prevailing belief among all nations that at death, the souls of good men were taken possession by good spirits and carried to paradise. But the souls of wicked men were left to wander in the space between the earth and the moon. Where do you think they got that idea? The book of Jude talks about that. The final, process of Satan and his demons is to be wandering spirits where they can't do any damage to anything anymore. What a horrible place to be, right? Left to wander in space between the earth and the moon, consigned in an unseen world, these wandering spirits were in the habit of haunting the living, but there were by means by which these ghosts might be exorcised. To exorcise them, or to be free of their evil influence, one had to set out food and provide shelter during the night. If they were satisfied with the offering, they would then leave you alone. In places sacrifice were offered to these demons or wandering evil spirits to satiate their desires. And this practice on this same day is found among ancient people in Wales, the Britons, northern Central Europe, Cambodia, Mexico. I've been in houses in Central America. I don't want to spook you, but I've been in houses in Central America going in where they have these little holders on the wall. And those are used to feed the spirits. It's not a joke, and it's not something that we ignore. And I've had to say, especially with newer people, that, is that what I think it is? Oh, yeah. I'm like, you need to get rid of that. Right? Well, yeah, but when I put things up there, everything's fine, and it's gone the next day. Of course it is. Those are not anything that God says we should have something to do with. Somewhat similar practice at different times of the year can be found in the history of the ancient Greeks and the Egyptians as well. The trick-or-treat tradition came from the idea that the evil spirits would play tricks on the living. So the living began to disguise themselves as goblins or ghosts to escape their evil tricks. Well, maybe they can't figure out that we are not them. Why do we need to be careful with this? In society, if you try to mend or blend in and mold so you don't stick out, what do you have to do that? Compromise usually, don't you? Right? Compromise. So you don't seem weird. So what do? Christmas time, you put some lights up a little bit. Or maybe you have a tree. Right? Or maybe when you go to a family gathering, so you don't offend anybody, you just go ahead and eat a couple pork chops. I've heard it all, believe me. You compromise. You say, well, it's not that big a deal. But what are you trying to do? So the living began to disguise themselves as goblins or ghosts. Soon, the masquerading evil spirits began playing the tricks instead. Threatening people with tricks in exchange for some kind of treat soon became followed. And so now children dress up. You go to Walmart. You go into some places. I remember when we were in Nebraska, walked into a Lowe's and there was this witch thing and goblins dropped down. I'm like, I can't even go get a piece of lumber. Get attacked by all these things. Oh, it's so funny, right? And so then you began to dress up and chant trick or treat to fill your bags with candy. I remember as a child, how many of you remember hearing this chant? I remember it. Trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat. Anybody ever hear that? Am I the only one? Cute, isn't that cute? No, it's not. Most parents encourage their children to be part of the Halloween scene. It's cute. It's what you do with the kiddies. The parents take them out and you do the trick-or-treating, right? Why would men or women want to keep their child from having fun? The world is so difficult as it is. This is a harmless holiday, as one parent told me. We live in a horrific society. It is part of many blessings are in it, but there's some very gruesome parts. Crimes publicized all over the place in gory detail. Those of you that have been around a while, if I go, you know what movie that's from. Halloween or Freddy, you know. And yet, there's a proclivity to enjoy those type things by some. Letting our children acknowledge and indulge in the sinister side of human nature by acting it out in evil is healthy? Help me out here. What did I miss? What did I miss? Subtle messages Halloween sends to very young children. Play acting sends a message that a little evil is okay. Just a little evil. I mean, you know, they'll recover. A little evil. That scaring people is funny. Any of you ever been scared? Surprised, scared? You know, what do? You grab your chest because sometimes you can feel it in your heart, right? You've heard the saying, I was scared to death, right? Scaring people is funny, especially when you are the scarer and not the scaree. Aren't all of these customs rather cute? It's a harmless way of acting that custom out. What real harm could come from there? Consider the learning process of small children. All right? Children operate more on the emotional level than the cognitive. Psychiatrists tell us little children are more emotional with feelings than cognitive, which is intellectual or thinking rational. I would disagree with parents that try to rationally discuss the decision with a 3-year-old. But yet I see it happen all the time in Walmart and restaurants. You know, oh, if you'll just let's talk about this. And Daddy and Mommy will give you this if you'll just do this. And you're thinking, are you seriously trying to have a rational conversation with a 3-year-old? Right? But some think they can, and they can't figure out when he's having a fit on the floor, you know, and pulling things off the shelves. That's not a rational discussion at any age. Ross Campbell's book, How to Really Love Our Children, page 31 to 32. When they get older, if we explain Halloween as just pretend, right? Cognitive learning, but their psyche already has been imprinted with the subtle message that evil is okay. Of course, any such concern, I would say, about such things would apply just as much as watching violent or bizarre TV at a young age or playing video games. I am shocked. Okay, now I'm going to go from preaching to meddling. I am shocked. We were sitting in an airport, I think it was on the way home, and a small child that I guarantee can't walk, can't read, can't talk, the parents gave him a phone, and it was just doing whatever. What does that do to their psychological makeup? I don't mean to offend anybody, but I want you to analyze and think about this, okay? What does it do? Oh, you're old school, right? I've done a lot of research on this topic, and I can tell you from an addiction standpoint, you are creating a problem that you will later say, oh, right? And so that younger children sanctioning of evil on a pretended basis might well send a message of what? It's just a game. And then they can't figure out why a few years later they blow a bunch of people away and they have no idea they were the nicest person, because they have a difficulty differentiating between reality and not reality. And there's a very definite, sinister background to this. Years ago, in the Batman movie that came out, the Joker, the character, about 2011, somewhere in there, Heath Ledger was documented to suffer emotionally, and playing this part absolutely sent him over the top and added insult to injury. Are we teaching children, here's a question, to model behavior of satanic cults? Oh, now I'm really reaching for straws, right? The childhood customs can imprint their value system in ways that we don't perceive. Harmful message Halloween sends. Trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat. Translate that, give me something I want, or I will what? Deface your property. I'll terrorize you or your family in some way. It teaches that extortion is okay. The word extortion, obtaining goods through abusing others, terrorism of sorts. We don't want anything to do with terrorism, do we? But yet it's okay to terrorize. It's okay to, what, egg houses? I remember a story in Wisconsin when I lived there. You remember that? Where they egged the front of our house, and eggs are nasty. They really can damage your siding, and they're really hard to get off. Well, when they were just continually egging the front of the house. Boom, boom, boom. So I called the police, and the police came out, and they launched, as he was driving down the street, an egg, and he had the window open, and it came in and hit him. The long and the short of it, they finally traced them down, incarcerated the young people, put them into a juvenile home. And he had to come back out later with whatever and clean my home, which didn't make him very happy. But they gave him a big fine for a projectile being launched. It could have caused a severe accident. But they dropped things off bridges. They egged homes. Used to be in my day, they'd turn the outhouse over, usually with no one in it. All good fun, right? Or light a bag of manure on fire. That was common when I grew up. People come out and step all over it, try to put it out, and just splatter it everywhere. That's funny. It makes a mess, right? Or they key cars in a parking lot. It's Halloween. It's okay to do all these things. It's part of the night, right? Part of the night. Teaches that pranks and vandalism are okay. Are these kinds of values we want to impart to a developing child? Halloween does not teach consideration for others. It does not teach altruistic values. It teaches egotism and self-centeredness. It's about me. I walk. And Halloween, it's always interesting to walk the day or two after, because you see all the candy that they didn't want. They don't like, I know I can tell you what they didn't like, and it's all laying around. And then the wrappers of the stuff they liked. It's okay to just trash everything. No, that's not what God says. Concerns for others is a social skill you must learn, and we need positive customs that teach and reinforce what? Good social skills. How many of you teach your children when they're at the dinner table that throwing food is acceptable because John Belushi said so in Animal House? What would happen? I mean, I hope you don't teach that, right? You teach it's acceptable as a child or adult. Now, I'm not talking about a 2-year-old, but as a 15-year-old, they can eat with their hands. You know, it's okay, right? What do you teach? Do you teach them how to eat with a fork, to hold it a certain way with a knife? Maybe they don't teach that anymore. Do you just grab it like a caveman? I don't know. You wipe your mouth discreetly, right? What's one of the things you teach? Don't chew with your mouth open with food, right? And then you have people as adults. How you doing? And you're going to watch that being masticated up. It's like, that's gross. Obviously, as a child, they were never taught, chew with your mouth shut. I'm really old school, aren't I? I don't know if they teach any of this anymore. I hope they do. I hope they do. People on all sides of the social, political spectrum are putting out a call for the teaching of virtues. I didn't bring the book because it's heavy, but here's what the book looks like. It's the Book of Virtues by William Bennett. Been around a few years. I would recommend, if you can find it, it's a good read. It's thick. It's about this thick. But is the spirit of Halloween a spirit of virtue and wholesomeness? Is it a slice of culture that exalts the weird, demonic, selfish, and self-centered? What is Philippians chapter 4, verse 8? Let's go over there quickly. Philippians 4 and verse 8. This is definitely talking about Halloween. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, of good report, if there be any virtue, any praise or meditation, think on these things. Is Halloween true, honest, just, pure, lovely, and good report? But yet, it's Christian. It's okay. Proverbs 22:6. Let's go there quickly. Proverbs 22 and verse 6. Very common scripture. In the 1917 Jewish edition of the Bible, it's interesting. It's a little bit clearer. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and as he gets older, he will not depart from it. I think that's clearer. Not when he is old, but as he gets older. So you train them. You say, school's having Halloween party, my child will not be involved. He's going to draw jack-o'-lanterns, my child will not be part of that. Right? Do you teach that? Oh, carving a pumpkin, just put a happy face on there? It's okay. I've seen brethren do that. I'm sorry. A smiley face. Well, it's peaceful. It's happy. Yes, but why don't you do that in June or July? Why around Halloween? Again, this slippery slope. Halloween can be physically dangerous to our children as well. With all the weirdos that are loose in society alone, is it safe to have children trick-or-treating? No, I think we figured that out. Do you see how modern practices of children dressing up as ghosts, goblins, zombies? And now we used to go out and eat on Halloween night. You go to a restaurant to get away from, my kids call them the Halloweeners that come to the door. But to get away from, you go to a restaurant. Now you have witches and zombies and goblins and weirdos waiting on you, so you can't. What do you do? Demanding food, follow the tradition of the ancient, those that lived back then. As the deviltry also, known as vandalism, conducted on Halloween Eve, is a direct carryover from those original beliefs. The history of the Catholic Church is very clear, particularly with Charlemagne. The church co-opted other religious practices that were of pagan origin to add membership to the church. You know, sometimes people say, why don't we have more people part of the United Church of God? Do you want to know why? Because we don't say certain things are okay. Because the Bible says they're not. Well, if we just met on Sunday every so often, more people would come. What does God say? Right? What does God say? Pagan origin practices were repackaged to appear Christian, but the practices didn't change. Halloween was adapted as a time to remember dead saints. Known and unknown became All Saints' Day. And why do you find such universal adherence to these beliefs among different cultures, regions, and ages? Because the answer, quite simply, there is a universal spirit world. 1/3 of those spirit beings have rebelled against God and worked tirelessly to deceive, discourage, and destroy mankind. Revelation 12:9. You know this verse, but let's go there. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9. It feels so good to be able to preach again in English. My brain's going back and forth. Apocalypse. Revelation 12 and verse 9. And that great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. Cast in the earth, his angels were cast with him. We know that verse. We can never forget that our adversary's goal is to deceive the whole world. And with the exception of a very few whom God has called, he has and is succeeding. That's why we have what we have today. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. When do most of the things happen around Halloween? During the day? No, it's at night. Why is it at night? You ever thought about that? Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, the rulers of the darkness of this world, against wicked spirits in high places. And I might add that we may not be aware. Who loves darkness more than Satan and his demons? Interestingly, fire has been a part of Halloween too. In Britain, bonfires, or bonfires as we've shortened it, are regularly lit for centuries because fire is supposed to frighten away witches and evil spirits. You ever seen it in the horror movies to keep these animals and giant pigs and rats and whatever? They always have a torch. Even going way back, Journey to the Center of the Earth, to keep the dinosaurs. You had a big torch with fire. Wah, wah, won't quite touch you if you have fire. Right? It's supposed to frighten away witches and evil spirits. The carryover today is a carved pumpkin, also with a candle in it. A scary face with a fire to frighten off evil spirits. Here's an example of how this is translated into our modern world today. 99% of pumpkins marketed domestically are used as jack-o'-lanterns at Halloween. They aren't for the Thanksgiving cornucopia or to make pumpkin pies for Thanksgiving or because they're pretty, right? The jack-o'-lantern comes from the Irish legend. The story tells of a man stuck between heaven and hell. As by the way, we don't teach that you go to heaven or hell when you die. I need to clarify that. Okay? When you're dead until you're resurrected. But although I know exactly where I'm going when I die, I'm going straight to the grave, which is hell. You say, well, I knew that, right? But when we die, you don't go to heaven or hell. You just go in the grave and you sleep. Pretty good nap, I'll bet. So the jack-o'-lantern says he's stuck between heaven and hell, result of a bargain with the devil, this man. He's given a single ember to light his way through the cold, dark winter, so he placed his light to a hollowed-out turnip to keep it lit longer. When the Irish immigrants came to America, they traded their tiny turnips in for giant pumpkins. Luke chapter 22. Let's go over there and notice something interesting. Luke chapter 22. Luke chapter 22 and verse 31. We know the story. The Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has desired to have you that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith does not fail, and that when you are converted, strengthen the brethren. Notice something interesting here. Satan wanted very greatly to destroy the very beginning of the church of God. He wants nothing less today. If he could have destroyed Peter and the other apostles and those that followed Christ, he would have loved that. He started with the leadership, and Peter was one of these people. We can assume without much of a stretch, he wanted each of the other apostles to be destroyed just as much. And the only thing that keeps him from destroying you and me is the protection that God gives us and through his Spirit. That's why it says to draw close to God and he will flee from us. When he can't get to what he wants, He simply works his way through the church until he finds a weakness and he gets in them that way. And we give him lots of opportunities. Pride, rebellion, attitudes, right? Being overcritical, judgmental, accusatory. He just loves that. He feeds on that. We have Paul warning church about elders that had gone awry and members who had been deceived by Satan and led others away from the church and the truth. And believe me, I can tell you this, that as a pastor, I must constantly be vigilant on myself, but also the protection of the flock. On occasion, we have some that come in our midst that cannot stay here. And we deal with that. And we ask God to protect and bless and keep. But we must always be vigilant. Little has changed since then. He would love to sift us as wheat. So we must be careful. 2 Corinthians 2:11. Let's go over there. 2 Corinthians 2, verse 11. In 2 Corinthians 2, verse 11, it says, here Paul is exhorting the church to forgive when offenses occur. The warning being that Satan can get the advantage on us. He says, lest Satan should get an advantage on us, for we are not ignorant of his devices, destitute of knowledge, not informed. What is his advantage here? He takes away our peace. He causes brother to be angry and bitter against brother. Right? He takes away peace in a congregation when there is strife. He takes away peace in a family when there's fighting. Any of you ever experienced any fighting in your family? If you say, oh no, my marriage, we've just like coffee and cream. We just go together so well. You know? No problem. Liar, liar, pants on fire. Right? Human beings. Now we strive for peace. Without peace, we are spiritually sidelined, stranded, and vulnerable. We are seeing an increase of these things today. Satan attacks his church from every angle and from very different perspectives. And he works to take away our peace at the family level, and he works hard on our children. And you need to recognize that. It is not okay when a child tells its parent when it's time to go to bed, no! Okay, well, we'll let you stay up a little longer. Wrong. Or, I don't like beans or peas or broccoli. Oh, it's okay. I'll get you spaghetti and mac and cheese. We've had that where we have people over and they bring their own food for their children because they'll only eat mac and cheese. You have to understand. Right? What's going to happen in the long run? I'm not telling you it's a sin. I love mac and cheese. I used to eat a lot of it. I don't now, but I used to. But when your children, you know, you need to set those boundaries properly. It's not popular, but guess what? You're not going to be your children's friends always. If you try to be their friend all the time, oh boy. Right? And so we see an increase in the world. It's hard on our children. There are real evil spirits, not ghosts and goblins, and little kids mockingly dressed up at Halloween. But there are real evil spirits out there. When we bless small children, we ask God to protect them from that. In Jude chapter 6, or in Jude 6, verse 13, why is there so much destruction and vandalism associated with Halloween? Just quickly read this. Raging waves of the sea foaming out of their own shame, wandering stars filled with self-pity, I might add, to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. It's not just a night for harmless fun for kids. It's something straight from the mind of a demon, Halloween. I personally do not at all like any aspect of Halloween. You can ask my wife how many years I've said I hate this night. Want nothing to do with it. The tribes of the ages gone, not following God, were inspired a mindset to establish as part of their religious worship. And it's never gone away. It commercializes a lightly candid-coded perspective for the kids. But at the heart is a pagan religious observance that is not of God. It is dedicated to worship or placating the dead. It is not of God. So God has built within humanity a desire, a need for religious worship, contact with the Creator. What an incredible opportunity. Apart from God, man has devised and created other ceremonies, customs, and manners of worship to fulfill that desire. And as I said, most, if not many, of the observance of Christian or Protestant churches today is descended from those ceremonies of customs. And I could go through the list. Our God has told us how to worship Him. On which days? The holy days of God make sense. They fit together. They fall together like a hand in glove. The plan fulfilled by God. We just went through that at the Feast of Tabernacles. They're logical and with great purpose. Keep these things in mind, we learned at the Feast of Tabernacles on 8th day. Be thankful to our Father in heaven that He has given us the real truth. It started in the Garden of Eden with mankind. God said, follow, obey Him, and keep His ways, and live happy, peaceful, wonderful, enjoyable life forever. Let's make sure that we follow God and His truth.